exams. They're not exams. It's a theology exam. I sat down to the course. So that's what stopped me with the exam. And it worked out perfectly because I didn't get first, second, third, or fourth. I got no money, which served me right for attending the lectures. But I got fifth place. And the second time I was diploma. It's a bit thin as a reason. In my honor, which is important very well. So that's the background to all this. I want to think about a series of sub-topics, if you like. I want to start by saying that you have to see the confessional nature of the Irish state in many ways, education, health, and so on, in the context of our history. The history was that the Anglican Church, which had established a dominant position in the late 17th century, and tried to control everything. 10% of the population had control of everything. Indeed, by 1975, 95% of the land of Ireland was in the hands of the 10% Anglican population by the way the penal law worked. So, when we emerged from the penal law period in the early 19th century, there were Protestant schools for Protestants and Protestant hospitals for Protestants. But Catholic for Catholics. So, there wasn't. What did the church do? It's not really blaming the Catholic Church for having a confessional system. All it could do was create institutions for the 90% of the population who didn't have any institutions at the time. And there were schools were set up. The British actually were very good on the school side. One of the first people elected after emancipation was a man, Sir Thomas Wise from Waterford. And he managed within a year to persuade the British to establish primary education in Ireland 20 years before it was in Britain. He also got a degree in technical education, and he had universities established before in Britain. It's a remarkable thing for a backbencher, one year in, as a Catholic in a Protestant Parliament. And so that was established, but at the primary level, the schools were confessional very quickly. They were not meant to be. But the Catholics and Presbyterians made them their own separately. Catholic schools, Presbyterian schools, and of course their own Anglican schools. So by 1850 the system was confessional, and you can see why. In secondary education, 1878, because the vast majority of population were Catholics and Catholic reform, the British produced an ingenious system of awards for exam results, which meant they couldn't subsidize Catholic schools, usually Protestant schools, and against who needed help. But by giving these awards for exams, they effectively did so de facto but not de jure. When it came to universities, they had sorted out, finally, there were universities established in 1945 in Cork and Galway. And the Northern Dublin competition of Churchill, that didn't finally happen in 1908, and University College Dublin was finally established and existed in another form before, but not as a university. And they incorporated in the National University of Ireland, and the Chancellor of the four universities within the National University of Ireland, but the nucleus of the joint was the Senate, as it's still a Senate, in their separate existence. So the system grew up in that way. Interestingly, the university education was not Catholic. The British liberal governments insisted it be non-sectarian. In fact, the Church had a very considerable influence on our universities in the early stages, in certain UCD up to the 1960s, and informal influence in certain areas like philosophy, a very considerable influence. But basically the universities were not religious universities. The idea of a Catholic university, which you have here in many parts of America, would seem very strange to Irish people. It would strike us that such a thing would be possible. If only the Catholics are minority of a Catholic university, if only the majority, it doesn't seem much point, I suppose. So that's the background. So when you have to consider what happened in the Irish Church as state was established, we inherited a confessional system which was the inevitable and necessary response to the Anglican domination in the 18th and 19th century. Constitution was one that had to be accessible to the British government. It doesn't matter. We now have a very good Constitution in many ways. We managed to keep the monarch in a symbolic form, but the roles of the monarch in, say, Canada or Australia did not apply with us in terms of the court in Parliament or appointing the Prime Minister. We have at the beginning a democratic system. Nevertheless, British, as I say, the Constitution. So nobody wanted to, nor would the British allow us to be a sectarian state. The Constitution certainly not sectarian at that time. But it had aspects that we were uncomfortable with because the monarchical system was there in symbolic form, and that had to be dealt with, of course, with Iraq. Once it was founded, there was a Protestant minority of, what, 7, 8, 9%, something like that at the time. There was a big movement out, it has to be said. There was the British Army left, wives, families, hangers on, and that was a big movement, mainly Protestant out. Then there were certainly some tens of thousands of Protestants left, feeling uncomfortable in this new state. And for some reason, because of course, to some degree, certainly in Cork in the War of Independence, and certainly during the Civil War, there was a sectarian element in what was happening. And we had a letter which was captured by the government during the Civil War from Mrs. Brewer, Carl Brewer's widow, to the Chief of Staff of the IRA, saying, don't burn down Woodtown House in Waterford because though the owner is a Protestant, they're sympathetic to us. So the idea is the House of Protestants burnt down was there, really. And naturally Protestants felt pretty uncomfortable. But the state is best. Great efforts were made to protect Protestants from what was happening to them in this sectarian element of the Civil War. And the laws passed thereafter. Nothing was done to change anything. 2 Protestant cathedrals in Dublin, no Catholic one, nobody even thought of changing that. So there was no overt change in the system. But over time, some laws were passed which were certainly influenced more by Catholic thinking than by Protestant thinking, censorship publications, things like that. They weren't sectarian in any way, but they wouldn't have been there if it hadn't been such a powerful church influence. And some of that was hard for Protestants to take. Moreover, they had a divorce law around in the old system that was getting divorced by a private will in Parliament. And that process was stopped by the new state. They blocked it in 1924. And Protestants had a grievance about that. There was no attempt to discriminate. Nothing negative was done. There's all positive things done. There was a strong Roman Catholic element to them. And certainly the state seemed a cold place for Protestants at that time. And in the 20s and 30s, the Protestant migration was higher than Catholic migration. That was reversed later on, I'll come back to that later on. Like I said, the company is now. How's the Protestant community fare? Extraordinarily well, in fact. The only discrimination we've ever had is a discrimination in favour of Protestants for school transport. Because there's very few Protestants. They need very better free school transport provision than Catholics who are always schools nearby. And we've got away with that. Nobody ever challenged it. Constitutionally, it's wrong. We shouldn't have any discrimination. They got away with it. In one case recently, the Catholics in a particular town were irritated because they couldn't get school transport to another town nearby where there were good schools, Catholic or Protestant. Nobody said to a place where the schools were poor. The Protestants got free transport